Good day. It's a pleasure to be here again with you. And today what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about gender and its influence on grief, as you see from the first slide. My name is Ken Doka. And as we move to the next slide, I'm just reminding you, as I have in every presentation, that this really has to be an intercultural dialogue. Most of my work has been done in North America with North American populations, and in fact, comparatively little research has been done in Brazil. So the challenge for you is to take what I'm saying and to say, in what ways can this apply to the Brazilian context? I look forward to that dialogue. As we move to the next slide, we see we have three major goals today. To discuss differences in what we're going to call grieving styles, and this is work that I've done with Terry Martin, to apply the concept of grieving styles to family systems, and to talk about how counselors can use these concepts in their own work. And in the next slide, I really want to talk about the biography of the concept. Every concept has a history, and this history was when my father died. And when my father died, and I was very close to my dad, my partner, Kathy, would say to me, I never hear you emote, I never hear your emotions about your father's dying. You can't keep it locked up. You, what I call the you of all people, should know that you can't keep it locked up. And that brought me back to a very critical experience in my own life, what's called CPE, or clinical pastoral education, as I was studying. It was a clinical experience. And I worked in that experience with dying children. And again, Kathy's complaint was often mirrored by my supervisor, who kept saying, well, what are you doing with your emotions? I know you get close to these children. I know you get close when they die, but I never see you cry. I never see you respond. And as all this was mushing in my mind, I remembered a chapter that a colleague of mine, Dennis Ryan, had written in Disenfranchised Grief. And Dennis Ryan was talking about the fact that when his son was stillborn, every day his wife would go upstairs and cry and tear after work, and he would be in his workshop. Now, Dennis was a professor of religious studies by vocation, but his avocation was sculpturing. And each day he'd be in his workshop hearing his wife cry as he was molding with hammer and chisel the perfect memorial stone for his son's grave. And he kept saying, where is my grief? Why aren't I grieving? Well, as you think about that story, it's probably pretty obvious that he was grieving in his work. He was grieving in his doing. He was grieving not by crying, but by making that memorial stone for his son's grave. And in the next slide, I began to do research on, well, do men grieve differently? And I began to uncover what I called the myth of men in grief. And the myth of men in grief is that men are emotionally unexpressive, they can't express their emotions, they're unable to relate, so that they don't grieve very well. And as you see from the next slide, this is expressed in a book by Carol Stoddaker called Men in Grief. And Carol writes, simply put, there is only one way to grieve. And that way is to go through the emotional core of grief. And she further writes, only by exploring the necessary emotional effects of your loved one's death can you eventually resolve grief. Now, as I looked at that statement, one of the things that struck me about that statement was it really went against everything I knew about grief. And as we go to the slide entitled The Myth of Men in Grief, that concept is not supported in research, in clinical practice,